Good morning. How you doing this morning? Finally finishing off the last two chapters of the book by Christopher Hitchens, chapters 18 and 19. In chapter 18, he goes through it's called A Finer Tradition, the Resistance of the Rational. So he goes through a lot of characters from history in this chapter, talking about people that have been opposed to religion, different atheist believers and stuff like that. And in particular, he focuses on Epicurus. He talks a bit about Socrates and Plato and Lucretius and all these guys from history and Voltaire. And I'm not going to go too much into detail on it. I'll just bring out the specific one that he mentions, Epicurus' version of the problem of evil. Either God is willing and not able to remove religion. It's the problem of evil argument. It's been mentioned many times in many different forms, right? If God is willing and not able to remove evil from the earth, then he's impotent. And if he's able and not willing, then he's malevolent. If he's able and willing, then where does evil come from? And so I think the problem is within the able and not willing. God is able and he's not willing. I think that should be glaringly obvious to anybody that has a idea of God as a father related figure. When we're born, our parents are a representation of love to us. A father's love for his child, a mother's love for his child is complete and unconditional, right? We know that. And we know that God is love. Sorry, it's just trying to stay warm out here. It's a little chilly. But what happens when we get up, we get older, and then the relationship between the parents and the children breaks down, and they're not viewed as love anymore. So then you have all this problems. And so yes, God from our perspective appears to be malevolent, and this is why else would we be instructed to fear God? The fear of God is based on the fact that since he's all powerful, if things don't go well, God, the buck stops with God. It's always because of God's allows it. And so absolutely from our perspective, God appears to be malevolent. So those three statements that Epicurus talked about the problem dissolve away when you realize that and say, oh, okay, it makes sense now. And so he says that he keeps going on and on about religion, and he makes a statement here. He says, because of this reasoning, he says, a believer takes on the impossible task of interpreting the will of a person unknown, and thus brings these essentially absurd questions upon himself. So Hitchens says God is unknowable, and so to even ask these questions is absurd. And that's the whole point of the Christian religion, is that God is knowable through the person of Christ. If we're seeing Christ, then we're seeing the God of Israel, right? People think, oh, well, Jesus is just this all perfect, loving person, and all he did was heal people. And but if you look at the character of Christ, if it's the same God in the Old and New Testament, then Christ is to be feared just as well, right? He pointed out to the people, saying, you see that catastrophe that happened? There was a tower that fell on a bunch of people and killed them. He says, the same thing could happen to you if you don't change the way you think, right? Sometimes you go to some place and say, I'm not going to do much healing here. These people have no faith. So he driving people out of the temple, his zeal and fervor to have the temple of God, of whom we are, right? The metaphor, the allegory, right? He got violent about it, right? And it's the same today. If we oppose having any type of influence of God in our hearts, things might not go well for us. So it's something to consider, right? Because most atheist thinkers separate the two. They say, well, Jesus was like this, but the God of the Old Testament was like that. Like God of the Old Testament was this really crazy, and they have all the terms of how to malign the God of the Old Testament, and they kind of ignore Jesus as a manifestation of that God. So enough said. But moving on, I'm not going to go through all the characters that he mentions in chapter 18, because he goes through a roll call of all the different ones. But surprisingly, he never mentions people like Emerson or Thoreau, right? Thoreau. Then, all the problems of religion, truth can deliver from religion, right? Logic can deliver from religion. Science, reason will deliver. And then, like Emerson and Thoreau, their cathedral was in nature itself, right? They would go out into nature and saying, this is a reflection of God. But those philosophers are not mentioned. They're conspicuously absent from his book in any form, and instead he focuses on all the horror and strife and pain that has occurred in the world, a lot of times admittedly religiously based, the misinterpretation of religion. And so finally in chapter 19, he reaches the point where he makes this final call to all his readers, and he says, now I'm calling upon you, the average person, to take up the call to atheism. And he says, as long as any, I'll try and see if I can find it word for word. He says, as long as any religion is banished from the conversation. This is his appeal. So you could say Hitchens is the catalyst for cancel culture, if you want to describe it like that. It says, on the sole condition that we banish all religions from the discourse. So it's funny, because he kind of mirrors Dawkins in this sense. He says, I'm allowed to talk about religion. I'm allowed to bash it and say all the bad things about it. But if you're religious, you're not allowed to talk about it. No, you have to banish that from the conversation. I'm allowed to talk about it because I'm against religion, but you're not allowed to talk about it if you're for religion. So it's kind of like, it's not a really even discourse. It's not a discussion. It's a one-sided lambasting of religion. And obviously that's Hitchens' view. I mean, the guy went through a lot of pain and sorrow in his life, and he saw a lot of the horribleness that religion caused. Now, if he had more of a definition as Dennett, I just started reading Dennett, Breaking the Spell, and Dennett gives room for the views of William James, who said you can be spiritual if you have an individual spiritual experience with God, which I believe in, and you don't have to be religious. So that's the exit, or the space that William James provide. And Dennett, so far from what I've read from him, much more pleasant reading, by the way, opens the door for that personal internal experience. He opens the door for having a spirituality without having the baggage and the horrors of religion itself. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into Dennett's book. I've already gone through the first 2 chapters, and I'll be talking about that shortly. But Hitchens, I'm so glad that the book is over. I finished it, and I understand his point, and it's a very dark, horrific viewpoint that he has. Unfortunately, he's passed on now. But he's in the same vein as Dawkins, right? Dismissing anything from a religious perspective from the conversation, and refusing to even allow the conversation to go there, which is very unfortunate. But that one's in the books. That's done. I'll save my notes on it. If anybody has any questions on Hitchens' work or Dawkins' work, I'd be happy to address them. And thank you so much for watching. I pray that you have a blessed day. Thank you. Take care now. God bless you. Bye-bye.